Good morning, friends and neighbors. It is Jenny James Gunn, and we have the second edition of our show, which is called Wired and Tired Now. I do have two guests flanking my left and my right, and we're going to be talking about the opioid crisis, what's going on with it, maybe a little bit of history, the politics involving it. We kind of delved into it in the first show at Coffee and Dulce. And we're gonna get right into it. I mean, there's literally, and I'm gonna throw this number out. And I read this online this morning to kind of get an idea of the severity of it. 130 people a day are overdosing on opioids. They give you some national stats. Between 16 and 19,000 people during the 1990s a year were overdosing on something. Now it's over 70,000 a year. So the number is just in general and ODing. And so we're seeing a huge change and shift. And I'm gonna have you introduce yourselves. Jeff, go first.
My name's Jeff Scott, Hombre del Pueblo, man about town. I don't know if I'm tired or wired or both, but I'm really happy to be here today to talk about this issue, and I want to specify in advance that I am really an amateur on this issue. I'm not a medical professional. I've worked in different fields, but I've always been interested in this topic because it affects everybody, and it affects your daily life, whether you have problems or not, or whether you know people who have problems or not, whether you every time you go see a doctor or medical professional, you have to make choices. Every time you're feeling down and in despair, you got to be making some serious choices. So this whole issue just seems to permeate.
But it's constantly in the news too. So we've had, in fact, we've had a lot of celebrities taken from us in recent years.
So and
on that,
right, and yeah.
Well,
I was just going to say after Michelle introduces herself, I want to talk a little bit about what I'm doing with.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
We definitely need to get into that.
Yeah.
Michelle.
Hi, I'm Michelle Mathis. I'm the executive director and co-founder of the Olive Branch Ministry, which is a faith-based harm reduction ministry based in Hickory that serves the Foothills Piedmont area. I'm also the board president for the North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition and a leader in the National Faith in Harm Reduction movement. And I have over 15 years experience in harm reduction.
And let's get into what you're doing in relation to the opioid epidemic and discussion.
Sure. So I went to see Michelle's presentation recently at an interfaith group that is dealing with harm reduction and trying to promote the idea of harm reduction from the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm, and I think this is the wise way to think about all the issues that we're thinking about. And there's clearly a barrier out there. There are cultural barrier, philosophic, religious, political, and one thing that I learned when I was running as a candidate was that there are a lot of groups that are interested in finding out, my views about their particular issues, but also they're trying to give me good information. Sometimes they're trying to give me bad information, but sometimes they're trying to give me good information about what's going on in the world so that we can make better decisions. So, I want to be informed. Michelle's got all this incredible on-the-ground experience that everyone needs to hear, but I also want to participate in this debate by being able to, help the pain management community, the medical users, the people who are dealing with this, the backlash to this crisis that we're talking about. I want to help those people to understand what their politicians think, right? So I'm helping to, with doctors and professionals in this field, to develop a survey for candidates. And right now, we're trying to limit it to somewhere between, 30 or 40 questions, and so we get a range of answers, so we can essentially analyze the data and figure out, by party and incumbency and office, what is it that they believe about the state of the world.
To basically get their understanding of the subject, because I think a lot of politicians, including yourself, because you run for office, and I'm a political activist, so I mean technically I guess I'm a politician too, and understanding the depth of this discussion, because it touches on a lot of socioeconomic subjects. What do you think is the hardest thing for people to understand about this? As far as what do you think creates the most misinformation on why somebody would be addicted to opioids, for example, or why anybody would be addicted to any substance?
Lack of education based on stigma.
Okay.
I mean, that's just it. If we can get everyone educated, we can break down barriers of stigma that will then help sway politicians and help create policies and procedures, even with procedures within medical clinics that help people get the care that they need. And at the basis of all of that, the lack of inclusion of directly impacted voices, people with lived experience, not just people in quote unquote clinical recovery, but people who are living the experience. That is the key to education. We have to have those voices at the table.
Now, do you think the voices that have lived this, that have gone through addiction,
and that are still going through it?
Oh, I'm still going through it. Yeah,
that's so important.
Is do you have a lot of people stepping forward to do that? Because
as a matter of fact, yes.
Okay.
There's a newly formed group, a branch in Charlotte, but the actual national president of the Urban Survivors Union, which is the drug users union, is based in Greensboro. And so this is a group of individuals who self-identify as people who use substances, and they are very politically involved. Recently, we all traveled to, or I traveled in group with them to West Virginia to do some political action up there. The president, Louise, is a dear personal friend of mine who has spoken at the UN, just all over the world. Literally, these individuals are organizing and trying to get their voices heard in political arenas and social arenas to make changes in policy, that will help protect the rights of people who use drugs.
And and one of the battles we have is our country has on some subjects we have a very law and order mentality. If somebody does something wrong, we throw the book at them, and we have 2 to 3 million people at any one time living in our prison system. Our neighbors who are incarcerated, and approximately 30% of them it's drug related. And when you incarcerate a user that's participating in using some type of drug that got them arrested and sent them to prison, is that really helping our society? Is that helping them at all?
We not only in this country, not only criminalize drug use, we criminalize the person who's using the drugs.
Right.
And that is a problem. It's a problem not only with law enforcement, it is also a problem even with treatment providers. We automatically assume that people who use drugs have records and that they are involved in illegal activity, neither of which is the case, necessarily. And so that's an issue. We need to follow in my opinion, the model in Portugal, where decriminalization has taken place. It doesn't legalize everything, but it decriminalizes it. It gives people the opportunity to receive treatment or enter into a recovery continuum at a place where they're comfortable. And that's where we need to move.
Well, let me mention something that we talked about on the earlier episode, and that is related to this idea of stigma, because I think the reasonably educated people in this country understand prohibition, right?
Yes.
They understand the dangers of it. They've seen all the Martin Scorsese movies they can possibly stand, right? And they understand that this has had really bad side effects. So it's not it can't just be stigma, right? It's got to be, I want it's nice to think that if we educate people and we take away their sense of stigma, that this will all come down collapsing. But we seem to have these other institutions that have come up, right, around prohibition. After prohibition, the gangsters were still in place, and so we've got, whether it's the prison industrial complex or the civil asset forfeiture groups. We've got people with a big interest in kind of keeping this stigma alive when we know, I think intuitively, that most of the country, for example, with relation to marijuana, like it should be legalized, people should be left alone. I mean, the country, in many respects, I believe, is kind of very small L libertarian. Leave me alone, let me do what I need to do. Now, I know you disagree with that slightly, especially because we're in the South, but I'm just wondering what.
I disagree with that respectfully, not just because we're in the South, but if we make the assumption that America, the majority, are reasonably educated, we wouldn't have Cheeto Jesus in the White House, or people that follow Cheeto Jesus that are sorry. You said I could do what I'm just saying.
No, go for it. We're
But
in the
it's not-
Thunderdome.
He's the Cheeto Benito.
Okay,
Cheeto
whatever.
Benito.
But we wouldn't have him, his administration, or people that are following him or voting for people who follow him, making decisions that affect the lives of people who use drugs. They're not. I don't believe that they're reasonably educated when it comes to that, because if they were, we wouldn't be in that predicament to begin with. So they have access to education, but I believe their education is not around this particular topic.
When I think they're going with a broad brush, and the whole basis of the war on drugs is normal people are going to say, just say no. And we heard this amplified with Reagan.
Thank you, Nancy Reagan.
Yes, but that whole, it came, we've built this entire industry around drug prohibition, the fake war on drugs, which honestly, I think the government actually wants drugs to come in. I think that's why we fight wars like in Afghanistan and things like that to protect our supply.
That's a big rabbit.
Well, but in general, no, we're not jumping down that rabbit hole. That's a tinfoil hat area. But in general, I think our government, it's like keeping yourself in business. If you want to sell snake bite kits, make sure people carry rattlesnakes with them. It's almost like we're not trying to fix the problem because this is a medical condition.
It is.
And if it's a medical condition, we have an amazing medical system in this country. It's debatable on what level we are compared to other developed nations, but we do have an incredible research development university. It seems to me that we hand it over to the medical professionals instead of the police/military people that are just saying, just lock them up, just say no, just put all the crackheads in jail.
Let me give you an example of kind of really quick of how we kind of got here, right? So if we look at the fact that a lot of folks blame Big Pharma, right? This is Big Pharma's issue. Well, who did Big Pharma market to? They marketed to physicians. People can't argue that physicians are not well educated, right? I mean, they're doctors, right, and prescribers. So we know that they are educated. The problem is they took people who didn't know what they were talking about at their word, right? A lot of even the farm reps were misinformed. They took them at their word. Then we have government agencies and oversight agencies like Joint Commission that then said, you know what, providers, you're going to have to make sure that people's pain levels are, that they have satisfactory score rates, right, with their pain levels. So we're going to go based on what Big Pharma said and make sure that people are prescribed. Again, people that are very well educated based on somebody else and rules and regulations made on people who weren't necessarily well educated or refused to acknowledge the facts. And then that trickles down to low-level prescribers and then eventually people who are prescribed the substances. And because there was not regulations and adequate education at each level about what was actually happening, we now have all these people who are addicted to opioids, right? If we're going to talk about that. But then if we look even further in North Carolina, we recently launched legislation called the STOP Act, which is supposed to stop the mass prescribing of opioids. However, we did a poor job in North Carolina of educating our prescribers even further on the consequences and unintended consequences of stopping that prescribing. So we had people who had been prescribed chronic pain medication for an acute issue over many years who were immediately stopped because our prescribers weren't educated on those unintended consequences.
So what happens to her?
So people converting within a matter of 6 weeks, we saw, especially white women in their early 40s or mid 40s to early 60s who were converting from using prescribed opioids to shooting heroin, and that's a whole other issue.
Why is that? Why
because
did they do that?
The prescribers were not taught how to titrate folks or encouraged to titrate people down. They were scared they were going to lose their license, scared they were going to get reported, and so they immediately stopped these prescriptions. And so we had people turning to the alternative that was available to them.
Right. So the trigger for this was in 2016,
Yes.
right? March 2016.
Uh-huh.
And correct me if I get this wrong, but it was the CDC that issued guidelines for the tapering.
Yes.
Okay. And so that essentially what many doctors and patients feel is that this was the beginning, sort of a new salvo, right, in the war on drugs. War on drugs going up against professional doctors, educated doctors, and like you said, the white women. War on drugs going against this population of people who need these medications. Because let's face it, this opium is a very successful product. It is a very successful product. Doctors need it. Doctors use it. Fentanyl, despite everything we've heard about it, the fentanyl patches it's also a very successful product, right? So and from my understanding, the addiction rates for medical users, for people who come in for surgeries or whatever it is pretty steady at 1%. The opioid crisis, and I would even dispute whether it's actually a crisis, but the large number of deaths are due to non-medical uses, and those are frequently due to other substances. And we may actually be sort of looking in the rearview mirror right now, because I understand that just last, when I was campaigning in the eastern counties, they were talking about epidemics. They were talking about people can't get jobs, they can't pass the drug tests. And I said, well, what are you seeing in your data when the tests come back? And it's like 75% meth. Okay.
Yeah.
So meth is already the sort of the drug of choice du jour. Now I said a lot there, but let me know if there's anything I said that you disagree with.
I agree with that. The issue that I'm seeing, we have a lot of meth in the rural counties that my organization covers, right? Yeah. But what I'm seeing is now that we've switched from smoking meth to injecting meth. Mm-hmm. And when you smoke meth, and if it's laced with fentanyl, the fentanyl burns up, which fentanyl is an opioid. Yeah. So now what we're seeing is people injecting meth who are not historical injectors, so they don't understand about harm reduction regarding things like even basic cleaning your skin and using vein rotation and things of that nature. So that's an issue. And then on top of that, if you inject the meth and it has fentanyl in it, then you're subject to also the consequences of the fentanyl. Right. So
which fentanyl for viewers who may not understand fentanyl, it is very potent.
Very potent. It's basically what they use to keep you asleep while you're receiving surgery in the hospital, right?
And in the form of a patch normally, right?
Well, no, in the hospital it's administered via IV, and it's monitored in micrograms by an anesthesiologist, but it's also prescribed in a pain patch form for chronic pain patients or end-of-life patients. But so what we're seeing is people who are used to having one reaction from meth, if they're not testing their drugs for fentanyl, and we do give out, but if they're not testing it, then they may get that reaction of fentanyl and not have Narcan on hand and overdose and die. So it's a huge thing. The drug drug source really throughout the state of all illicit drugs
Mhm.
pretty much is poisoned now with fentanyl.
Right.
Yeah, to be honest.
Okay, so the community that I'm working with here,
Mhm.
they, I guess they object to this paradigm that we find in the newspapers, which is there were a lot of drugs produced, doctors gave them out, people got addicted,
Mhm.
and so that's why we have a crisis. They sort of object to that argument. So what they say is what I just said, which is the addiction rate for medical users is based on scientific studies is very low. It's the non-medical users or the people who've gotten, had to, who like they like substances, right? That's where most of the deaths are. And because of the fentanyl and because of the ability to, apparently it's, my understanding is a lot of it's coming from China, but even if we cut everything off from China, it's actually fairly easy to make here. I guess the point I'm getting at is that the idea that big pharma is a convenient scapegoat.
Mm-hmm.
I have my problems with big pharma. I think they're very corrupt, and I would like to, for a separate conversation, abolish the patent systems, right?
Right.
So, but having said that, they do provide what I consider to be useful products, and clearly acute pain patients and chronic pain patients need the good stuff, and they need to work with their doctors. And these the backlash, from the tapering and then going after these doctors has led to a pain management crisis. A lot of people, these Facebook groups have come up, these pain news networks. I just got exposed to this community over about a year ago when I went to I just got invited to an event,
Mm-hmm.
and these people are really hurting. They're pretty serious, and you probably know more of them than I do. But I'm we're just trying to understand and educate people
So
about pain management.
I want to hit on a couple of things,
Sure.
and I'm really not going to talk. I want to. You said something about people that like the drugs. Now, I that almost made it sound like it's a choice. I think there's a lot speak to the addiction side of it, the deal of it, because I have a personal experience with this, and I had a stepfather that had multiple knee surgeries, and then he started having stents put in, and he got addicted. And as far as I know, is still addicted to opioids, and he gets them mostly on the down low, and he gets them from his doctors too. But he has multiple doctors, and so he's getting a script from his heart doctor. He's getting a script from his knee doctor. He's getting them at all these different places, and it seems like he'll get 10 there, 30 there, and then he's probably I know he's got some illicit sources. How long typically does it take for somebody to get addicted to an opioid-based drug? Is it 10 days? Is it 30 days? Is it 60 days on it?
It could be as soon as 3 to 5 days.
Okay.
And so I would like to see the studies, and I'm gonna try to research that to see. And I would love if you have resources to share with me, because I'm always about educating myself.
Yeah.
But a lot of the pain patients that I know that have gone to pain clinics do have substance use disorder, but they don't have substance misuse. So they're still using them as prescribed, but they are addicted. And that is the type of conversions that I saw shortly after the STOP Act went into effect. People who had no issues, they were not in chaotic use, they were not misusing their prescriptions, they were taking them as prescribed. But when that prescription was cut off, they realized they had to have that pill to start the morning and that pill to go to bed at night.
They literally couldn't lay it down.
Exactly.
They could not stop.
And so I think there's a big difference between substance use and substance misuse. And I'm a chronic pain patient. I do not take opioids for my chronic pain. I went to a pain clinic for a number of years. I tried alternate therapies, aquatic therapy. I tried the shots in my. So I've been there. Still there. There's some days where my leg I can't get moving. Right. If it's really bad, I'm on a cane. And then there's some days like this where I'm doing pretty good.
Well, that's because you're here with us at Casa Cano, the house of ill dispute.
Right. But all that to say, and it's not a matter of after that period of time where you're taking it and you're taking it as prescribed, and you think, oh, this is great because my doctor is giving me this and it's giving me this and giving me this. That's not when people are in crisis necessarily. It's when that's cut off. And then there's this panic that sets in of what am I going to do? How am I going to function? How am I going to maintain a roof over my head? I can't go to work because I do medication.
Well, especially an arbitrary one written by politicians where they just basically put the Jake brake on and stop them full stop.
Yes.
And I know with people that have had substance use and abuse, my stepfather and my brother, they both, when they went into full stop, they had all kinds of side effects. There was so many deals. And kind of to quote Jurassic Park, nature will find a way. I mean, people, when they need stuff, whether for me it's, dark chocolate and red wine or opioids, if you're craving it and your brain is saying you can get this at all costs.
Yeah, and it's not a point of getting high. At that point, it's a point of no longer being sick, of not getting sick, of not suffering the withdrawals that you may not even know that you were going to suffer from until that medication is stopped. Right? It's not a I want to feel la la la. It's a matter of I don't want to be vomiting and having the worst flu I've ever had in my life, and I want to be able to get out of bed and provide for my family.
You said earlier that you don't like using the A word, addiction, and it's precisely because it's very confusing to people. Is it something in the brain? Is it a genetic predisposition?
I don't like the word addict.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I don't like the word addiction because.
And I don't either. We're in agreement on that.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that still has that stigma, and people think, oh, well, it's a choice, right? It's a moral failing. That person's an addict. That person's a junkie. That person's a druggie. Whatever. It is substance, and it's in the DSM that it is substance use disorder, right? It is a disorder, a rewiring of the brain that even after you become abstinent, if you're fortunate to become abstinent in your working of the recovery continuum, then your brain still has to rewire, and it never goes back completely the way it was. That's why it's so easy for people to reinitiate use at some point in the future.
Is it comparable to like a trauma, like a blunt force trauma that causes PTSD, where it really changes or remaps your brain? I mean, would that be comparable?
I'm not a clinician. I'm just a harm reduction specialist, but the reworking and the remapping of the brain has actually been proven by those bright little rainbow scans that doctors do.
Well, yeah, and you see a brain chemistry and a brain alteration. I know from not only my suicide attempt, but my trauma, my PTSD from that, and just my daily thought process. By being a hate crime survivor, I look at things differently. I move differently. When I go in public spaces, I think differently than I did. I also transitioned too from presenting as a male to living as a female, and females have different realities.
Yeah. And
my introduction to womanhood was being raped and beaten at knife point by 9 men. So that reality changed a lot of things, but I do notice some triggers, some things, certain people, especially men in public spaces, where they'll shake my hand or the funny reaction or body language or something, and just I can feel my brain going like this, like oh yeah, no, and my flight mode wants to kick in, and I have had panic attacks in public situations where I've gotten F out of there, and at least for a while.
Well, so let's
circle back to that.
Let's go back to this. the figure that I've been hearing is somewhere between 1 and 1.6 or something like that percentage have a, for lack of a better term, let's call it a predisposition. So if you give them something, they're going to develop some kind of dependency on it, right? Because it does wonderful things for them. Like I like coffee, I mean, I like that little kickstart in the morning, and I actually feel like, yeah, I've got a little small d dependency that I need, it just fires things up for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these patients in this community looked at those studies and looked at those figures, and the whole issue of whether the brain can be rewired or from trauma or PTSD, I don't know about that. I'm not an expert, but I heard an interesting story, and I guess this is kind of related, but we had a lot of soldiers in Vietnam who were strung out. They liked heroin, and when so the question becomes, how many soldiers died of opioid overdoses with this large population of users that liked it? And the answer is not very many. They either didn't record it or they didn't track it or whatever. But not many of them died. And the reason is the quality of the product was really good. And they just used it to relieve the anxiety of obviously being in a hellhole in Southeast Asia. So what do you think about the idea? I'm just throwing this out there of the idea of simply legalizing heroin,
And having a clean supply.
of having
Works in Canada.
Yeah. Okay.
You can go and get your heroin pill, and you're good to go. I have no issue with decrimming, and I don't have an issue with safe consumption sites, and I don't have an issue with legalizing a clean supply that is not poison.
Okay, that was a softball question.
Yeah.
Well, and
I mean, and I'll just say, some of my colleagues may disagree with me, but I think you would be hard pressed to find some that do. I think that we need to bring the voices of directly impacted people to the table, and that table means to our elected officials and to our prescribers, and say, this is what we need. This is what, because we don't have the right to tell folks what they need, right? But ask them, what do you need to keep you safe, to keep folks alive? And then listen to them. Yeah. I mean, imagine that. Ask a question and then listen to the answer.
And intoxicants of any kind, including alcohol, opium, all that's existed for millennia. I mean, there's depictions of opium dens in Chinese pyramids from 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. Sumerians made alcohol. One of the core things that we always want, besides sex and food, is some type of intoxicant to relieve our mental pain, our mental stress, our physical stress, or whatever. I think a certain amount of the human population is always going to seek that somehow. And if you decriminalize it and provide a safe medical apparatus with our medical industry, you wouldn't get people transmitting HIV and hepatitis with dirty needles because of the shaming. There'd be so many. I think there'd be more harmless ways of them being safe spaces and being able to use what they need to get through their day, and then also being able to safely offer them help and not putting medical providers in jail for being a drug dealer.
Here's the thing: we already have safe consumption sites in America, right?
Right.
We have them in the airport, right? We have them in train stations. Heck, we even have them on trains. We have them in your downtowns. We make them gathering places. We make them places that we have work celebrations. They're called bars. And they're safe consumption sites for the most part, right? It's people putting drugs in their body because they don't want to deal with the ish that's in their life, or they want to celebrate. And that's okay. So if we have those safe consumption sites, why are we judging people for the chemicals in their body? What makes it right for you to put a beer in your body and I can't put a bong in mine, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, and so we already have safe consumption sites. People need to get over that. And we regulate the alcohol, right? We regulate the alcohol industry, so why not regulate the substance industry as well?
Yeah, well, I can't possibly disagree with that.
Oh, I know. I'm just saying.
Except simply to add that we know that alcohol does a lot of damage, and compared to heroin, compared to opiates, opiates don't do that kind of organ damage. You know, it doesn't do that.
That's right. That's right. But prohibition does. Prohibition of that causes different bodily damage, right? As a result of it.
That's true. I guess to go back to the beginning, which is, you know, we've got this stigma problem, and the stigma is helping to fuel the prohibition, and the prohibition keeps this big social apparatus in place: the prisons, the asset forfeiture, the DEA, and surveillance too. I mean, surveillance on people, getting to know their medical history, getting to know. So we've got some new fears to consider there.
Well, and it's also too, look at the black market alcohol, aka the moonshine. We live in the South. I mean, you know,
moonshine.
go NASCAR, and but think about all the people that, and I heard stories. 'Cause I lived in the mountains of Missouri for 12 years. I lived in the Ozarks, Branson, Missouri, and there was tons of bootlegged moonshine. And I said, well, probably don't want to drink that. Uncle Willie put that through a radiator. You'll probably go blind, you know. And so the, you know, regular moonshine that you would buy at basically a bar or dispensary, like they had them, you know, they had the legal ones, like the apple pie ones. They're not going to make you go blind. So parallel that with the illegal black market drugs versus medically supervised drugs. When you put it underground, there is an element of, well, they bought it. It's their problem. There's no professional. There's no Hippocratic oath. There's no safeguards. There's no safe space at all. You know, and so I can't read that.
Well, so there's a question about, you know, harm reduction policies also include lesser damaging drugs, right? And so one of the reasons we haven't had sort of a national harm reduction set of policies and environment is that weed is still, you know, illegal in a third of the states, right? And it's only over the past 10 or 15 years has it become decriminalized and made available for recreational users. So a lot of pain patients, if you're a pain patient in North Carolina, it's still illegal to have a bunch of weed, right?
Right.
So you gotta, how far do you have to drive out of the state? Where do you go? I mean, I don't know where people go, but they'd have to go. They have to go somewhere else to think about what can I do to lessen my dependence on something that you know, there are too many side effects. I don't want to deal with this. I'd rather try you know, cannabis type products. So where do you think?
How does legalizing marijuana play into that? I think. I mean, like if we, well, I think we should decriminalize.
Well, I think we're
into all prohibition.
In generally, we're probably going to be in agreement on that. This would be helpful, but
it won't help. It won't necessarily help with the rewiring of people's brains, right? It won't help with the substance use disorder. But what it can do is lessen the effects of withdrawal while people work through the brain health issue. It also can address pain, chronic pain issues, seizure disorders, and there's several other different categories that it's been proven to work in. That if we were able to implement it early on in diagnosis, people wouldn't have to get on pain medications, right? So I'm all for it. I hadn't told y'all, I didn't tell you in the last show, but I'm a member of NC Normal, right?
Yeah.
And so
I think all of us are.
and
Yeah.
and I've been asked before to
Not
speak
yet.
out publicly in favor of it, and I never have until now.
Yeah.
You know, just because of the role that I play in my own agency. So I'm speaking on a personal level, but I'm all for legalizing, you know, marijuana, and I believe that it should become mainstream as far as addressing, you know, pain issues.
When you do see the THC and the CBD addressing, you know, whether it's high levels of CBD or high levels of THC for different disorders such as seizures. There's a plethora of different inflammatory diseases and issues, chronic lupus, arthritis, diet. You see a lot of people when they get put on prescription grade marijuana. You see tremendous deals. Israel did a study on it I think about 6 or 7 years ago. They were actually vaping it in hospitals, and tremendous success, and doing it right there on the front lines of people that needed it the most. And I think that would be a great safeguard to put in. It just makes sense, you know, and it's botanical.
Well,
and
again, if it's regulated, you know, so I just think that is not trying to pull, you know, the government into it.
Yeah, it depends on what you mean by regulated. If by regulated you mean that if I go in and buy something that's 4 ounces, then it's got to be 4 ounces.
Yeah.
If they say they grew it in Hawaii, then it must be grown in Hawaii. If they say they inspected it 14 times before they put it in the bag, then they should have inspected it 14 times before they put it in the bag.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, you pay your license fee. You pay your normal sort of business tax. Fine.
Right.
What the mistake that California made was putting this, jacking up this ridiculous tax on it, which meant that people just said, well, screw that, I'm just gonna,
we'll go underground.
Yeah.
I can get it
Yeah.
cheaper.
Yeah.
I mean, and Canada had a little bit of problems with that too. That the legal stuff was more expensive than the illegal. And so, whereas Colorado has seemed to perfected that they do produce at the dispensaries a high grade level of marijuana. It's well regulated. It's a quality product. There doesn't seem to be a lot of issues or backlash. And I don't know how long they've been doing it. It's 8-9 years now, or something like that. I mean, with great success.
One of the funny things that's sort of been keeping the marijuana movement from growing, so to speak, is their lack of access to banking services. But there is legislation now, the SAFE Act, and if you're out there and you feel like calling your congressman or your senators to get them on board with this, now would be a good time, because these banking bills I don't know what their status is, but I get the normal mailings, National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, which has been around for 50 years, plus or minus a couple, and they're working very hard on this issue, and I just feel like, again, we're part of a kind of a normal middle American majority that says, I think it's time we can take the stigma out of this and say, if people want to use it, and even if it just makes them feel good, it makes them feel good recreationally, if they think it helps their pain, if there are studies that indicate that it helps their pain or whatever, that's fine too. But I think it's something we can all get on board with, right?
Well, and you touched on it on the first show about, I believe you said Portugal is decrimmed everything and they had good success.
Oh, amazing success. Crime rate has dropped. People entering into both physical and brain health treatment has risen, and that's amazing. Overdose deaths have dropped. think it's really important. But I think we're a lot closer than people think as far as legalizing marijuana. And I'm going to tell you why. I think it's if for no other reason than from a fiscal responsibility reason. If we look at law enforcement and the fact that so many states, are now looking to legalize hemp, and this is crazy, but the drug sniffing dogs can't differentiate between marijuana and hemp. So if they pop positive on something that may be hemp or marijuana, and it's legalized, they're going to have a hard time, figuring out which it is, especially if there's other substances that are there as well. So they're going to have to, they can't retrain a dog sniffer.
Yeah.
They're going to have to get all new dogs. They're going to spend all this law enforcement time trying to prosecute possible marijuana cases, and it's going to turn out to be hemp. And I think law enforcement is going to really get tired of it. I've talked to a lot of law enforcement officers. They kind of feel that too. So I'm kind of really rooting for that.
It's over, Rover.
And also,
You're out to pasture.
think about all the hemp offshoot products that you can make, and as that starts becoming widespread, I mean, it's kind of like, poppy seeds on a hamburger bun, and doing false positives. It's like,
Oh my
if
gosh.
we would just get away from the messiness of bringing in the police and military into this, because when you create a police military state, when you create that big of an animal, you have to use it. It's kind of like buying a Ferrari and never letting it out of the garage. Our mentality is, if we build it, we're going to use it, and I think it's kind of a self-prophesizing cycle that we've gotten into. Is that how do we explain why we did this for so long, and how did we get it so badly wrong? And now I think politicians don't like to admit when they're wrong, and we have had generations of politicians who have got it wrong, and they've made medical decisions criminal, and that's the bottom line. Is we criminalize a medical condition, like if all of a sudden they thought, hey, cancer patients all need to go to prison for whatever reason, they too much of this, and we want to put a morality to that. I think we've criminalized something that clearly is a medical condition, and we need to turn it back over to the medical community.
So why are we trying? Let me just, I want to talk about the way that we framed the issue right at the beginning, because it's interesting to me, because we talked about it coming in with this sort of conventional view of the opioid crisis, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not really an opioid crisis, right? It's some people with non-medical needs, non-medical preferences, are misusing substances, sometimes in large numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes in large dosages. They can't get good products. And so that's the source of a lot of the deaths, right? There are medical users, and there are recreational users, and there are people in jail because of prohibition, right? Because of the stigma that supports the prohibition mentality that supports all of these bad institutions. So isn't this really a prohibition crisis?
Oh, well, it is.
I mean, that's a better way to frame the issue rather than
I think
say,
that's the big
people are
umbrella a lot of other crises and
Yeah.
fall under. But it's a prohibition issue.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I get, if you want to convince people, or you want to educate people, you want to tell people, look, don't worry about people who need, or don't morally judge people who have substance problems. They have got medical needs. We're trying to do the work that we can for them. They're not victims of predators trying to addict them, trying to, put them on this substance. There's a prohibition crisis. They cannot get what it is that they want because their doctor is constrained. The dosage has been constrained. The products have been constrained. The products have been pulled. So there's kind of a crackdown from the legal, the medical industrial complex. You can't get what you need because we don't think you should have it, and we're going to put a stigma on it, and we're going to keep, the DEA and the DOJ, and we're going to continue our war on drugs, but in a more nefarious way. Is that? Would you disagree with any of that?
I agree with that in part, but I also say that there is a large number of individuals, and I think it's well beyond 1%, that have developed substance use disorder because of prescribing.
So
because of prescribing, and that I track back to lack of education and misinformation from big pharma in the United States.
Okay. So some people have been duped.
Oh, absolutely.
And they've had subsequent health problems because they've been
absolutely
duped. Okay.
Absolutely, yes. And by the time I usually encounter individuals, it's no longer this recreational drug use. It is I am using to maintain whatever my new sense of normal is because of my substance use disorder, and I just don't want to get sick. I don't want to get those sick. And so that's where I encounter people at that in the work that we do.
Well, and in essence, I mean, I think we've had people that have gotten involved with this, aka politicians, that have said, well, our answer to everything is just say no. Just stop it right in its tracks. We'll just pass a law and we'll criminalize somebody. We got to have somebody to answer for it. I watch a TV show called Bull with my roommates, and one of the things is a jury always needs to have somebody to answer for it. So if you're not guilty, then we need somebody else to blame. So a criminal defense attorney has to have somebody to blame. Our country always responds that way. Like when Bin Laden blew up the Twin Towers, we had to have somebody to blame to go after. We had to go. And so for the drug crisis, the prohibition crisis, we have to have somebody to blame. We can't just say it is what it is and let's get the medical professionals in and let them do their job unencumbered.
The buck no longer stops.
Yeah.
You know, we used to say the buck stops here. It no longer stops.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And I think it's our politicians actually just being smart, letting the medical profession take over, them get out of the way, you know, and get law enforcement out of it, because DA is definitely not a bunch of medical doctors running around with machine guns. We literally got the wrong people. We're sending a firefighter to do a policeman's job, and vice versa. We're sending, in essence, I got that reverse. Really, we're sending in, a policeman in to do a firefighter's job. We need to put out the fire the right way, which is a safe and less harmful way, and let the experts go in, help people, and help our neighbors. And because this doesn't affect just one intersection of life. It isn't just inner city people of color. This is all of our society. My stepfather's well into his 70s, veteran, retired business owner, and opioid addict.
So we're wrapping up shortly?
Yes, we are winding this down.
Well, let me give my final thought in 30 seconds.
Okay.
And that's, this has been a great discussion on it. Whenever I listen to Michelle, I always learn a lot. Very important. We totally agree on the Hippocratic Oath, and if more people understood it and understood how it would be, implemented, that would be great. And I believe that we really need to talk about this in terms of the prohibition crisis, and historically, the bad things, the consequences, the unintended consequences of very strict prohibitions, banning things, and pushing people who have dependencies, whether they're justified or not, into other markets where they're not going to be as successful. Go for it.
My final thoughts are this. I've enjoyed it, but I want to address the audience. Make sure you have access to Narcan or naloxone, the medication that reverses an opiate overdose. If you don't know where to get it, you can go to naloxonesaves.org, or you can go to olivebranchministry.org and reach out to my organization directly. We will make sure you get what you need. Never use alone. There's a toll-free number that you can call that someone will be on the phone with you if that's what you decide to do, or you can call us. My number's on our website, and we'll be happy to be with you. Know that you are loved and that you are not judged by people who truly care about you. And stay safe.
Well, that was beautiful. And I've enjoyed the discussion with you guys. And, you know, our society needs to, and our politicians most of all, need to think, I shouldn't do any harm. How do I help people? Why was I elected? Why did I run for office? And I think our society in general, if we took that attitude, both as a voter, vote in people that go, I want to make my society better by not hurting people. And we have this equation that somebody has to be hurt. Somebody has to lose for us to win.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've heard that trumpeted by certain people, like Cheeto make little hands, that we're going to make America win again. And we really don't have to have that argument. Everybody can win. It's not a zero-sum game. And we should reduce harm in our society and love each other. Love thy neighbor as thyself.
Absolutely.
Good afternoon, and thank you.